David Shearer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And like my colleagues, we will be supporting this to the Select Committee, the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. We look forward to getting and receiving submissions on it. And certainly from the Labor side, sir, we will be supporting this bill as much as we obviously can, and particularly as it is a result of the fine work that has been said by Peter Beck and his company Rocket Lab. I first came in contact with Peter Beck about 6 years ago when he was launching one of his prototypes off Mercury Island with the help of Sir Michael Fay. It was a successful launch, although as far as I know, they didn't get the nose cone back again, but it certainly went as they had planned. And since then, and before then as well actually, because much of the earlier work was facilitated by Trevor Mallard while he was the Economic Development Minister, in terms of getting and moving that through, and it's been picked up by this government quite rightly and carried on. So as my colleague David Clark said, this project will have many fathers if it is certainly successful, many politicians who will want to try and claim a little bit of that success. But sir, Peter Beck, I have to say, is an extraordinary character in the sense that he had a passion from a very young age and has seen this through. He has, his qualifications is of a tool maker from Otago Polytechnic, as I understand, or maybe the Southland Polytechnic. But certainly it was as a tool maker. And I remember speaking to him about his qualifications, and he said that at one point he contemplated going to Auckland University and doing a Bachelor of Engineering, and he went and saw them and they said, well, yeah, okay, but unfortunately you're going to have to start at stage 1 engineering. He thought long and hard about that, and then they said, but perhaps you could lecture our master's class in rocket technology. And he thought, well, if I'm teaching rocket technology at a master's level, do I really need to go back and do a full bachelor's degree? And to his great credit, he didn't. And he joins that league of New Zealand entrepreneurs and inventors and people that have got a passion and who have seen it through and are able somehow in this country to be able to see that through. I remember at the time of the rocket launch in Mercury, on Mercury Island, saying to him, I mean, I can understand what you're doing. Obviously, this is a terrific project. I mean, what sort of competition are you going to come up against? And he said, well, there are other competitors out there. And I said, like who? And he said, well, for example, like NASA. And I said, oh, I actually have heard of NASA before, and that's pretty illustrious competition to be in when you're in that league. But as he explained, his vision was for a commercial enterprise, quite different from the rockets that were being blasted off at that time. Most of the rockets that had been sent up into space previously had been rockets that had been modified missiles from the United States, which were considerably larger than what Peter Beck wanted to put up into space, considerably, therefore, much more expensive, and sat probably on a waiting list for 3 or 4 years before they were able to get clearance and get a window in which they were able to be shot up. His vision was much different. It was for smaller payloads with some very exciting technology around fuel and the engines that he was deploying, much lighter and able to get a rocket into space much more cheaply. And of course, that is what made it so attractive for so many companies who wanted to put a rocket into space. So he has orders already before he's even created or even had that launch. He's got an order book that's pretty full with companies like telecommunication companies, Samsung and others, for putting up low-level satellites, communications facilities, etc., that want to get in and get their name on Peter Beck's Rocket Lab's list, so that when this does prove itself, as I'm sure it will, they are in the line, if you like, in the queue for being able to get their technology up and into low low space. So New Zealand does have a number of opportunities and advantages. Obviously, we've got somebody like Peter Beck, we've got his vision for the lightweight rockets, but we've also, as somebody has said, we've got a country which is isolated, surrounded by ocean, and therefore is ideal for firing off a rocket from Mahia Peninsula. It wasn't originally intended to go down to Christchurch, in fact, into Canterbury. Unfortunately, that didn't occur because actually the various actors in Christchurch couldn't come to an agreement. So Mahia and the eastern coast of the North Island is going to be the winner in this. And we hope that the launch is successful. I think we have to be realistic, as Peter Beck said to me when I went through his facilities out near the airport the other day. He said 80% of all new rockets fail. I hope he proves to be the 20%, but the chance is that there is going to be some teething problems, etc., before this takes off. But it is pretty exciting, sir. If you think about what we're looking in front of us, we will be one of just maybe a dozen countries in the world that has a rocket industry, that is a space industry. As Peter Beck says himself, per capita we have more rocket scientists in New Zealand than any other country in the world right now. It is truly remarkable. So, sir, coming to this legislation in the last 1 or 2 minutes, what we need to do in terms of ensuring that there is a solid regulatory and a legislative framework for an industry like this that meets our international requirements, sir, we need to make sure that we are able to do that properly within New Zealand. The New Zealand government is currently negotiating an agreement with the United States government to enable Rocket Lab to be able to access technology that the United States has, which will enable Rocket Lab to be able to function much more effectively and cut the corners, and certainly in terms of a lot of the technology that it doesn't currently have. And to do that, we have to have an agreement which binds us and obligates us never to pass this technology on to a third party and conform to a number of requirements, which, frankly, sir, is, having had a look at this agreement, is you'd be called pretty fair and pretty straightforward. Once we have that, once we are able to launch a rocket, we need the legislative backing to ensure that we adhere to all the various space and technology treaties that we are obligated to operate under. And when we have done that through the legislation that we're passing through today, we also sort out some of the issues around what happens, insurance, etc., if one of these rockets does actually go off course, etc. I mean, we don't like to think about that, but those sorts of things are necessary within the legislation. Lastly, sir, from what we can see, the drafters of the legislation have necessarily taken a rather permissive approach rather than a deep, dark regulatory approach to this legislation. In other words, trying to make it as open as possible, knowing that the legislation, we don't want to come back to the House in 2 years' time to change the regulation. It's been done in an open-handed sort of way. We'll look at that. We'll hear from the various submitters. I hope Rocket Lab itself, to make sure that we are getting in the right ballpark and getting it right, so that we are enabling Rocket Lab, Peter Beck and his enterprise, and perhaps the spin-off companies that come off from that as well, to do their job and put New Zealand on the map as a rocket launching nation. It's pretty exciting stuff, sir. And with that, I once again say that the Labour Party will be supporting this bill to the Select Committee. Thank you.